start by introducing myself. I'm Tara Crow, and I am the Partnerships Lead at Leadership Victoria. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from Footscray, in the inner west of Melbourne, on the lands of the Bunurong people, the Kulin Nation. Leadership Victoria acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land in which we live, learn and work, primarily the Wurundjeri people. We pay our deep respects to the elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. We recognise that leadership has long been embedded in First Nations culture, and we are committed to listening, learning and walking together in the spirit of reconciliation. As we strive to foster inclusive and impactful leadership, we honour the wisdom, resilience and ongoing contributions of First Nations peoples on our communities and our shared future. Including this topic of leadership and imposter syndrome as one of Leadership Victoria's Thought Leadership series has come out of many conversations that I've had with the applicants, with participants, and as well as our fellows, our Williamson Community Leadership Fellows, like the ones that are joining us today. The notion that as a leader, you would not be affected by the feelings of imposter syndrome is simply not so. So I'd like to introduce our panel today and hope that our conversation is both offers support and inspires the leaders that are on this call. Lucy Duncan is a 2022 Williamson Fellow. She's the Director of Operations of Learning for Asia Pacific at Kenvue, formerly Johnson & Johnson. Lucy describes her role as helping people have a better day, which is very fitting for her to be leading this conversation today. Ross Connor is a 2023 Williamson Fellow, and he's the Director of Transport Regulatory Operations at the Department of Transport and Planning. Amongst many things as a change management leader, Ross is a champion for the social issues of men's violence against women and children. And Divya Pathipaletti is a 2024 Williamson Fellow, and she's also the Executive Manager of Business Strategy Transformation Enablement at NBN. Divya is also the President of the Board of Directors for PMI Melbourne Chapter. So I'd also like to welcome my Leadership Victoria colleagues. We've got Nkosi, Ryan, Jody, Claudia and Michelle with us today. And that's enough for me, really. I'd like to hand it over to Lucy. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, it's such a pleasure to be here with everyone today. I was so excited to see all the different places in the chat that people are coming from. Especially I saw one from Shepparton. When I did the Williamson program, probably one of my favourite experiences was our trip to Shep. So extra shout out there, but it's just wonderful to see so many people on the call. Hopefully there are some 22 Williamson alumni as well. That's my group. But I'm excited as well for there to be people here who maybe haven't done some of the programs, and this is the first time that you're engaging with Leadership Victoria. So thank you all for being here and for your presence. We know it takes a lot to step out of a busy work day, a life day, and take this time to invest in yourself and your own knowledge and learning and exploration. So I'm excited that you're here, and I think all of us are really looking forward to the call. So we're going to jump right into it and focus on this topic of imposter syndrome today. Our goal as panelists and LV is to really help you feel less alone in any challenging experience of imposter syndrome as you've experienced it, and also to be feeling more equipped and more empowered to navigate those kinds of feelings as they come up at any point in your journey going forward, and particularly as part of your leadership journey. We know we can experience it ourselves, but also many of us lead, whether formally or informally. So that's really where this lands in here today. We hope that the conversation resonates with you and generates some questions and ideas to support your own growth. But in thinking about how we achieve our goal today, really, we know that there is no right answer. We're not coming with an answer to fix in what we hear of as imposter syndrome. What we do know from our own Williamson experience is that there is a lot of power in sharing with vulnerability. There is so much power in asking great questions. So what we're trying to do is achieve this goal today by creating space for a candid dialogue. because the session is being recorded, we don't have Chatham House rules, but I'm sure that everyone here will respect the space and know that you can jump onto the recording later if there's anything you want to follow up. We are not experts, even though I think we've all experienced imposter syndrome, but we're excited to jump in and just have the conversation. Now, as we think about what imposter syndrome is, we've thought about our own experiences, and as a panel, we realized that they'd be quite different. And so what we wanted to do is start by grounding ourselves in what imposter syndrome actually is. It's a word we hear on LinkedIn all the time. It seems to be something that pops up a lot. But what we did is go back to the original source to figure out, what is this really? And imposter syndrome is actually imposter phenomenon. So originally coined by psychologists back in the 70s, it was determined to be a phenomenon. And I think that's fascinating because a syndrome has the sense that there's something wrong with us. There's a problem, we're sick, there's an issue. But in fact, there's nothing wrong with any of us. This was just a phenomenon identified by a pair of psychologists who'd dug into the topic because they themselves had had some feelings like this. It doesn't discriminate by gender. We know that commonly we think of imposter phenomenon as associated with women, and particularly high achieving women, and that comes out in the media a great deal, but actually it affects women and men, and that's why it's wonderful that we have women and men on our panel and all kinds of people on our call today. But that original definition was the persistent inability to believe that your own success is deserved or has been legitimately achieved as a result of your own effort or skill. Now, even though that was how it was defined by the people who labelled it first, day to day, it seems as though the meaning has really broadened quite widely. And so starting this dialogue today, we want to acknowledge that how people perceive and experience imposter phenomenon is really varied. So what we'd like to do is ask you to pop in the chat any just feelings or words that come to mind when you think of imposter phenomenon as how it might have shown up for you. Just pop it in the chat. We'd love to see if it's being experienced in different ways by this group here. Because certainly when we as a panel chatted about it, we found that it came up in really varying ways, from feeling a bit like a fraud, like someone will find me out, from not feeling smart enough, from feeling pushed out of our comfort zone. So we've got some great ones coming up here. I love this, faking it. We hear that expression, fake it till you make it. Questioning your own thinking. You know, Christine said feeling out of your league, being promoted to a new role, being exacerbated by perhaps neurodiversity, feeling like you're experiencing self-doubt, questioning your decision-making, perhaps being anxious to express your opinion in a group setting. This is a safe group setting today, so we definitely want to hear. So just as everyone can see from the chat, there are so many words just pouring out, and I think this shows how important this dialogue is. And really helps underscore that imposter phenomenon comes out in many different ways. So for today's sake, we are not going to dictate a strict definition. We just invite you to interpret it based on what's meaningful for you, your own experience, perhaps that of those you lead, because ultimately what matters most is the impact that these feelings might have. How do they impact you at work, at play, in the space that these feelings show up? And how do they impact you as a leader and impact those around you? So today, what we're really looking to do is dive into that. And hopefully that definition and that little grounding and sharing from all of us helps us really feel like we are not alone, because we aren't. So let's jump into our panel discussion. I'm really looking forward to hearing from Ross and Divya. So I think we'll start broadly and we'll go to Divya first by asking you, Divya, what has been your own experience of imposter phenomenon?
Absolutely. Thanks, Lucy, for firstly grounding us in a shared understanding of what it might look like. Well, imposter syndrome, really, how I've experienced it, it drastically changed over the years. It's surely started with doubt in my skills, low self confidence, and often wondering how I got in. I remember when I got my first job, I had moved from years in research field in biotechnology and molecular biology to telecommunications, and I was very surprised that I got the job. I feared for days in the new role that someone would come up to me one day and say, "Who let you in? This is not your industry." Then it moved to feelings of doubt in my opportunities and achievements. For most of my career, I moved through roles at pace. I was offered new opportunities or promotions every 1 to 2 years, which I grabbed with both my hands. But then that voice crept in, where I doubted if I really deserved the promotions. People around me told me that they had to wait for years before that happened. So I kind of attributed my opportunities to luck or, poor decision making skills of my leaders, or often thinking they probably made a mistake and they're just too nice to change it now. But then, on a more serious note, there was also this voice in my head that often wondered if I was in those roles because of my skills and capabilities, or if I'm a token diversity hire. Um, uh, Through a lot of work on understanding myself, through professional and leadership development, mentoring, I understood my strengths, the values, and my unique value proposition. But then syndrome started showing up as a comparison thing. I remember going to all these amazing events and conferences and be among some really smart, influential people. And I feared that if I opened my mouth, they would realize I'm someone who doesn't belong there, or that I'm not as well accomplished or strategic in my thinking. I know, Tara, you mentioned my board roles. Even on boards and decision making tables, I would often think to myself, how did I get here? Do I really deserve to be here? Um, Currently, imposter syndrome sits quite differently with me. It is showing up as a symptom of representation, belonging, and inclusion. I often look around myself, and when I see no people like me around me, I often wonder if I deserve to be there. And it's not about having low self confidence in myself or low self esteem, but when you constantly hear voices and opinions on how women may not or should not be juggling too many roles, or misconceptions of how people of my cultural background are too nice or will be great at technical work but maybe not so good as good leaders, these voices kind of become your own inner voice. I've had someone recently say to me out of good intent that I do too many things, and as a woman, I should be prioritizing my family. They also express their concern that because I juggle multiple responsibilities, they worry I might not be able to do a key leadership role. And I know these opinions may be a minority, but as someone who loves to latch onto the smallest piece of evidence of how I might not be enough, I often wonder if I deserve the opportunities that I get or if I deserve to be in the rooms that I'm in. And this is how I want to summarize how imposter syndrome showed up for me over the years.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Divya. And I can see already from the comments that what you're saying is resonating with people. The element around representation, others feel that, and also the comment around wondering whether or not a man in your position might be told the same thing. So really appreciate you sharing with such vulnerability. Let's hear now from Ross for his experience, and then dive deeper into both of your experiences.
Thanks, Lucy. So the first thing that comes to mind is an earlier experience in my career, and I was an analyst at the time, one of about 20 odd in the business. We were all writing industry reports, and all of a sudden one day there's whispers around the office, and managers resigned, and what's going to happen? Who's going to get into that role? And before the end of that week, the kind of senior management had tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Ross, we want you to do that job." And it was the first time I'd ever been in a leadership position, and I just couldn't help but, well, firstly, be really flattered and humbled by the opportunity. And then when trying to walk the first few steps in that role, I remember my internal voice is usually pretty vocal and usually pretty constant, but it was stunned. It was absolutely silent. And I remember those first weeks and rolling into months just being nerves and wondering whether I was doing the right thing, wondering whether or not I was stepping close to the precipice, and that I would find myself sort of falling and in over my head. And that slowly kind of faded as time went on, but it never truly went away. And then I was made redundant from that role 12 months into it. So after that point in time, it was almost like all of that internal monologue, or what was behind that nervousness, had just amplified. That internal voice was saying, see, you weren't good enough. See, it just confirmed all of those biases that feeling like an imposter had kind of instilled in me. So, I at that point in time, it was 8 a.m. on the train heading home with a box of my things, very cliche. And I had determined to, not let this define me, and to move on from that. It was a real crucible moment, to borrow a term from Igniting Leadership, which I did in 2012. The and at that point in time, it really kind of drove me to fight that internal monologue and to prove it wrong. But knowing that that's imposter syndrome, or was really where it was coming. Well, I didn't know at the time how to kind of put that into words. I got a new role, and it was a significant promotion as well. So it was all kind of happy days, but it was a very different job, and it all just kind of came flooding back in those first few days and weeks. If I look back then at how I experienced it with those pivotal moments, compared to stepping into the role I'm in now, which is an executive position, has over 50 staff reporting directly and indirectly to me, and I still felt that imposter syndrome. But the growth that I've been through between those periods of time, which is about 12 years, really kind of speaks to the fact that you're always going to feel those feelings, but they are less. You understand them, you know what they are, and they represent an opportunity for growth. They represent the fact that you are stepping outside your comfort zone, and that you're starting to push yourself. So I've really kind of, and we'll get into it in a little bit soon, I've really learned to embrace that feeling now, and take it as a sign of personal development, of growth, and really reframe what it is to feel that feeling.
So fantastic, Ross, that you've been able to get to that place of reframing. And I think what you touch on there is, it sounds as though there was a point at which you actually recognized that you were having these feelings associated with roles, and have been able to have that enough distance to recognize that these are some feelings you can work through. So I think that's very inspirational to know that, if we're not there yet, we can help label it, and then that gives us a bit more power.
Yeah, and just on that point, Lucy, it for me, I never recognized it at the time. That was kind of part of my journey of self-discovery, of self-awareness, of understanding my values, and in particular kind of adaptive leadership, and how that's employed by me and by those around me. Understanding that has led me to look back at those times where I've had those strong feelings, and then understand them better, which has then helped me recognize them again when they come up again, and then respond differently. So that's certainly been a huge part of that journey. Well, what about you? How have you experienced it?
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. Even preparing for this, so many thoughts popped up. One that really jumps out at me was also professional. I was fortunate to move to Spain with my company. It was my first job in that company, in Johnson & Johnson. My first time in human resources. I was, my first time as an HR business partner. I moved to this new country, and it was a new company. And about 2 days before I started the job, my new boss, who was wonderful and supportive, copied me on an email where he sent out the announcement about my role. I read the email with my picture and my announcement, and I was horrified. I just thought, this is wrong. I cannot do this. It sounds so ridiculous to say now, but I genuinely thought, have they misread my CV? All the interviews were video. I was like, have they got the wrong person? I used to work in recruitment and I have seen times where the wrong person was hired for a video interview. So I think that traumatized me. But I really thought, I am not capable of this. I can't do this. What am I going to do? And that was compounded by the fact that there were other things happening in my life. Geographic change, company change, function change. So I now recognize that that was imposter syndrome. I had great support from on the ground to work through it, but it's interesting because it's a reminder that those feelings can be amplified by what's happening in the world around us, and we want to be mindful of that context. Context is always something we talked about in Williamson. So that was one. And then on a more personal note, this one, in the spirit of vulnerability, it's very raw, but I'm a new mum. I have a 9-week-old baby, and hopefully you can't hear her in the background. But I went to my first new parents group yesterday, and I had massive feelings of self-doubt. I was looking at other people and saying, well, their baby was much calmer, and they're not using a dummy. Should I not be doing that? Am I doing the wrong thing? Do I not have the skills? What it was just so much, both around my feelings as a mother, but also my feelings as my own new identity, like the child that I'm me. So I think that also speaks to the fact that, is that a specific, neat imposter syndrome as defined in the 1970s? I don't know, but the feelings that came up for me of self-doubt and anxiety had a really big impact. So I think there are a couple, Ross, that come up for me, and that actually loops me back to Divya, because I was so interested in what you said about how you were told, should you be focusing on your family? So can you talk a bit more about how imposter syndrome is showing up for you as a woman, and those kinds of comments? Because that must be very challenging. How do you work through that?
It is, and I think I probably want to talk a little bit about intersectionality as well, because you get, firstly, there's this inner voice and everything that you tell yourself, and I think for all my life, I've become very good at having that really good negative script about what my story is, what are the things that I could be doing better, and it doesn't make any better when other people give you feedback as well. Even the smallest shred of things that I could be improving, I would latch onto it and then see what I can be doing things differently. But when I get positive feedback, that's something that I've never been able to accept. And I so relate to the story you just shared, Lucy, around being sent that email and having that disbelief that that person is you. I went through that. I still sometimes look at my bio, my resume, and like, this is not me. I feel like I've overinflated it, even though I know that like, people have told me that I'm being way too modest on that. So there's always that disconnect between the story I tell myself, the story I hear that other people tell about me, and what I believe and what I don't believe. And it becomes a lot more nuanced, especially as someone who has multiple intersectionalities, being female from a culturally diverse background, coupled with age, family commitments. These doubts can become very nuanced, very layered. What really helped me is, I think I'll pick on what Ross just said earlier around truly sitting down to reflect on the values, what my values are, what my strengths are, what is my unique value proposition. And programs like Williamson has been incredible in that way for me, helping me with the tools and resources, conversation, to kind of really have that space and time to unpack it. Help me, because then I have now this story that I tell myself, and that I really want to believe, and I believe, which has changed significantly, all these doubts that crept up from intersectional identities.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for calling that out, because I think it shows we each experience this in such different ways. And I love the strategy that you've used, right? Because I've often thought we can't help how we feel, but we can help how we act.
Sure.
Feelings of any kind are going to come and go our way in any sense, but we can help how we act. So you really trying to find that evidence and be proactive about that, I think is wonderful. It's fascinating how sometimes we listen to the negative data points and not the more positive data points. And it makes me wonder why, you know, it is that we filter that out. I think that's really fascinating. And it also makes me think about a comment that was in the chat around the fake it till you make it. And knowing that we'll have these feelings is one thing, but finding a way to just keep progressing through it rather than letting it stop us, letting it, you know, encourage us to not apply for the job, the program. Actually, one of my own experiences of imposter syndrome, and I'm disappointed that I handled it the way I did, was I was considering my leaving my first career, which was law. I was very unhappy as a lawyer, and I wanted to move careers. And I saw a consulting firm, it's called Nous. It looked so amazing and cool and interesting, but they had very explicit academic requirements. It said, if you don't have over a certain level, basically don't apply. Sure, it was worded in a nicer way. And I just felt really intimidated and thought, I'm not smart enough. You know, I had some good marks in some areas, but terrible in others. So I didn't apply. I just didn't. And I never gave myself that opportunity, which is such a shame because I've since come across people who work there. I hear they do amazing work, you know, and whether it's that company or on another, what I did in that moment was I said no to myself. I didn't even push through. They might have said no to me, but I took myself out of the running. So I think that's one that came up for me as we progress through this. So I'd love to expand the dialogue a little bit now, you know, particularly spurred by something Ross said around a group of 50 people, and shift this a little bit to the leadership aspect, because we know that certainly in Williamson, we talk about managing self, but also managing others. So, you know, Ross and Divya, would you be able to speak to how you've seen imposter phenomenon surface, perhaps in team members or for your teams, or how you've navigated it specifically in terms of your leadership, formal or informal?
Yeah, so one of the things that reflecting on my own experiences has really shone a spotlight on for me is that that feeling tends to be most keenly felt when I'm focusing on whether or not I know enough, whether or not I am an expert in any particular thing, or if I'm doing something new, is you know, am I going to make a fool of myself? You know, there's always that little bit of fear of failure that's there. What I find helps me, and what I find is really helpful for others when I'm having this conversation with them, is that a focus on not what you know, but who you are, what are your core values, and what those are the things that have got you to the point where you are today. Those are the things that aren't likely to change in the future, and they're your strengths. They're the things that you've relied upon, whether you know it or not. And they're the things that will help you succeed in what the challenges you're facing today too. So, you know, for me, there are three things that come to mind when I mentioned that. It's empathy, respect, and curiosity. They're the three things that I lean on when I'm feeling this way, that I know are going to get me through, because I know I'm going to feel that way again. And so leading and helping others through these experiences is really a journey of self-discovery for them, one that I've been through myself, and one that I'm increasingly confident to guide and coach others through that similar journey, to help them understand that, yes, you are the right person for this job, for this task, or for whatever it is you're doing now. And the things that have helped get you to this point, they're not what you know. That's great to rely on. It's who you are. It's how you go about doing that task. That is what helps you succeed. What are they for you? And not just sort of, you know, the surface level stuff. Dive deeper and asking those questions. What else? What else? What else? You know, the pretty key to our collective Williamson experience has been, you know, exploring that depth and really understanding where that comes from. And I think that's where the gold is. That's where, you know, moving through these feelings and using them as a platform for growth becomes a really powerful thing.
I absolutely love that expression. It's not what you know, it's who you are. coming from an HR, people and culture background, I constantly hear, it's not what you know, it's who you know.
Oh, you might have
And
lost.
I just love the reframing. It's who you are, not about who you know. So that's wonderful. Divya, what are your thoughts on that? How does that resonate with you and what's your experience?
Oh, look, I love what you just said there, Ross, around, really spending the time with the team to understand and I guess support them through their journey. First and foremost, in terms of, me as a leader and working with people around me, having that awareness, a real acute awareness of my strengths, my vulnerabilities, and the beliefs that lead to my own feelings of imposter syndrome has really made me more aware of identifying signs within my own teams, but also armed me with strategies on how to be a better leader within this context. Some of the things that really come to my mind are, first and foremost, you'd probably hear me say this. I'm so passionate about the role of diversity that plays in the context of imposter syndrome, and really ensuring you have diverse teams so people feel represented. I know both of you kind of mentioned this, showing and owning your own vulnerabilities to really bust that myth of perfection in leadership. I resonate with the point that you made, Ross, around, especially when you lead technical or specialist teams. I've been in that space so many times, and I think what really helped is understanding the difference between technical leadership and adaptive leadership, and the role and the value that I bring to the table. I think there's still some belief of, hero leadership or leaders as superheroes, which makes the feeling of not deserving to be a leader even worse. Some of the ways that I've navigated that is really investigating into education and awareness of myself, of my teams. Mentoring really helps cut through some of that, but also creating a culture of inclusion and belonging, and paying a very close attention to signs of people feeling excluded, demotivated, and enabling a sense of I belong here, I deserve to be here. um, I think expanding on the point you made there earlier around um, providing feedback, especially with people around you, to be really specific about the reasons for the feedback, whether it's positive or constructive. Because my experience has been that when feedback mechanism or the feedback structure is not quite comprehensive and doesn't have supporting evidence, teams tend to build people build their own story. I do that all the time. I build my own story to bridge that gap in the proper feedback, and which usually is never a good story. And I think finally, a lot of role modeling and storytelling plays a key role, just like we're doing now, listening to as many stories of how people navigated their own manifestation of imposter syndrome. So it makes it a dealing with the feelings and that navigation a lot more doable, but also provides assurance that this is a shared experience, as we are seeing through the chat as well. Um, Lucy, anything that you want to add there?
Absolutely. I think that there are some really specific instances that I've had, and one was around having a team member who was a much more of an expert than I was. Ironically, the topic was coaching. I was responsible in my role heading development for the HR function to bring in a coaching methodology, and I knew nothing about the practice of coaching. So that was where I had to be very vulnerable with my team member who reported to me and say, look, I am not an expert here. I don't know this. We tried to get very practical by articulating what was my role in the process of starting to initiate this capability at Johnson & Johnson, and what was her role. So being vulnerable and kind of putting my hand up to say I'm not the expert was something that really helped, because we had an open conversation. I was able to empower her, because at the end of the day, it's about getting the job done well. It wasn't about who got the credit. That's not what it's about. So that's certainly one experience that I've had in terms of the leadership piece. And it actually triggers me, something you said, Divya, and that reflection triggered me to think about something recently that I saw on imposter syndrome that I thought was fascinating. Divya, you mentioned storytelling, and it reminded me of a clip of a CNN interview that I saw recently, where the US Olympian, the rugby player Ilona Maher, was asked about imposter syndrome. Now, this was obviously she's on a team, although I'm not the leader of that team, but she's on a team. She was asked about how she overcame imposter syndrome. And that question had the implied assumption that she experienced it. She said, I don't have that. And the interviewer was really surprised and said, how is this possible? I feel like it runs my life. And, Ilona really pushed back and said, look, no, I've worked really hard. I'm very dedicated. She shared some more of, all the experiences that got her to where she had achieved such success, and said, it's okay to be proud of what you've done, and it's okay to believe you deserve something because you put the work in it. And I really remember noticing that because it was inspiring, but also there was a bit of backlash. I think there was some backlash on the interviewer for kind of pushing and pushing, and some on Ilona for just being so, bold in saying, no, I deserve this. So I think that's an interesting reflection. And maybe starting with you, Divya, I wonder, just posing the question there and seeing your thoughts, is imposter syndrome something that particularly, whether it's as women or in different areas of intersectionality, we feel like we should say we have? Because not everyone may experience it. So curious to actually touch on that topic of, do we actually all experience it, or are we feeling we should say we have it because we need to be, humble, because that's what sometimes society expects of us?
Absolutely. Let me start by saying that I'm experiencing tech issues. As you can see, you can't see me. I will reset that straight after this. But um, look, that is a very interesting question, Lucy, and I think it begs to really deliberate on the connotations that imposter syndrome has, because typically, and this has been for a large part of my own life, where I heard imposter syndrome, I interpreted it as, which for most part it is right, that as low confidence, low self esteem. I don't have a strong belief system in myself. And these are all, key weaknesses that people see as deterrents to being a good leader. And when you add other layers and struggles that you already have to show up as a good leader in the context of being underrepresented, I think people often tend to hide it. And I did that for a very long time. I didn't own up to it. I knew I had it, but I didn't want to say it out loud because, gosh, people already think I don't deserve to be here. And imagine if I accept it myself, and what would that be, and the consequences of it. So I think more than whether one has it or not, or whether one needs to acknowledge it or not, I think it probably is time that we reframe what imposter syndrome looks like, and really where it needs to be normalized. It needs to be, as just like we do everything else within leadership, it is a key adaptive challenge that we have, and I think we need to work through that in that way, and it needs to be more a sign of strength than a weakness. A mentor recently told me that they think having a little bit of imposter syndrome that's in check has always been a good thing for them, because it really helps to, I guess, to perform and really question yourself in terms of performance. Um, I tend to agree with this thinking because as I reflect on my own journey, sometimes questioning whether I deserve, or if I'm enough, or if I know what I need to know, having this kind of doubts in my head really helped me up my game and deliver in a way that I'm proud of. But also it helps me keep my own biases in check and make sure that the systems in place are equitable and are not functioning to favor me over others. And that really helps me reflect on my own privilege. So I think we'll need to reframe what it means and the connotations around it. And I'll jump off and be back in a second.
And we heard you perfectly, which is great. I love that reframing. And I think, Ross, that speaks to some of what you've done yourself. So are you able to share a bit more on that?
Yeah, I just want to touch a little bit on some of the points we've just sort of discussed too, and being a gendered issue is certainly like I've heard that before, and it's obviously foreign to my personal experience, because clearly as a guy, I've experienced it too, and I don't know that it could be generalized that men do not experience this. This is, men perhaps just do not talk about it. which, let's be honest, as blokes, we are a very, very hit and miss at times when talking about our feelings from time to time. And I feel like there are elements in, today's society that are just trying to reinforce that. I personally feel that it's something that we should all be open and willing to be vulnerable and to have these conversations like we're having today. I think they're incredibly valuable, and they normalize that it's okay to not be okay from time to time. And also too, I feel like there are spectrums of what we're talking about too, and there are intersections with some really serious anxiety disorders as well. And often it's not going to be enough to do things like reframing and looking at those positives in your situation, or finding a safe person to talk to about this. I'd really like to call out at this point that sometimes professional help is often required, particularly if you're feeling these feelings with such intensity that it becomes debilitating. Your GP, a psychologist, mental health professionals, your EAP in your workplace as well are all great sources of getting through that period, so that you can get to that healthy part where being able to reframe that feeling, being able to come at it from another angle, or step up onto the balcony, as we would say in Williamson, and observe yourself. That starts to become a real tool that you can use and turn on and off as you need it. And that's something that I've really leaned into, particularly over the past two years, since 2023, as a 2023 alumni. My ability and capacity to do that has certainly grown tremendously, and it's been immensely valuable for my own, confidence, understanding of self, and therefore, being able to identify these feelings quickly, to be able to get up onto the balcony, assess where they're coming from, what part of the environment that I'm currently in is generating this vulnerability, and is that a threat, or is that an opportunity? And then responding to it accordingly. I think they're part of the toolkit that is really important in terms of being able to respond to this feeling when it comes, because it's there, and it will never not be there.
It's so interesting, Ross, that you mentioned the balcony, because I think that's such a useful strategy. I was going to ask about how your Williamson experiences through Leadership Victoria and adaptive leadership frameworks have helped support you. And I think that balcony one is a great one. So for those on the call who may not be familiar with that, are you able to just very briefly explain the balcony dance floor metaphor? And then perhaps you and Divya could share anything else from an adaptive leadership or Williamson perspective that has helped you?
Yeah, so stepping onto the balcony is really that metaphor of you're at a concert, and picture the balcony that's kind of looking down onto the dance floor. Normally you would be the person on the dance floor. You're seeing that concert from the perspective of someone actively participating in it, dancing away, enjoying life. Or perhaps not so enjoying, depending on the environment you find yourself in. But you can't see everything from there. You only know kind of what's immediately around you. By stepping up onto the balcony, it gives you a different perspective. It lets you observe different aspects that are influencing your environment right now. Perhaps if you're up on the mosh pit and getting pressed against the gates, you suddenly are able to see that there might be a bit of space over here, or you could get there and have a bit of respite over there, or what's causing that press at the moment, and is there anything you can do about that, and how can you kind of respond to that? Just metaphors, but that's kind of that image you get. So when you're feeling those strong feelings, getting up onto the balcony really helps you make some observations that you can't make when you're in the middle of that intense feeling. Divya, how would you kind of characterize that?
Oh, you've spot on there, Ross. Um, for me, it's exactly what you just said, that they're around taking a step back and not getting really bogged down by the messiness of the feelings, but trying to understand what the big picture is. And I think for me, stepping onto the balcony really helped me think about putting that problem in context with everything else that's happening around you as well. It's not just that one little siloed thing, but the environment, people, who are the people missing in that conversation, and what else is happening out there. And I think by asking myself some of those questions helped me step out of some of those really detailed, nuanced thinking, which probably wasn't being helpful in those contexts. Um, just to add, I guess my own perspective on adaptive leadership, the frameworks, Williamson, how it helped me is around imposter syndrome, especially is for a very long time in my life when I explored leadership development, and I'm a lifelong learner. I love learning. I love learning through formal programs, through conversations, through experiences, and I put myself out there to do that. I always thought leadership trainings are about, how do I be a better people leader? How do I have better conversations? How do I give better feedback? How do I build high performing teams? It's always been on the people. It's never been about me. I think Williamson kind of flipped it a little bit for me in terms of last year and I'm a new fellow. Last year has been all about me. It's been about who am I, what is my leadership philosophy, what are my values, what do I want to do, what is my purpose as a leader. And I think and really looking at my strengths and my values and finding ways to get my head around them and believe them really helped me. It helped me shed some of those beliefs that I really strongly held about myself, about whether not being good enough, or I am a recovering perfectionist, which never helps with these kind of things. My standards are so high that I never almost meet them. So being able to really, I guess, make it realistic was helpful, and Williamson did provide me the tools for that. And so now I think I believe I better surround myself with people to help me believe what the story that I want to tell myself, and I do tell myself.
I absolutely love that. I love that. So we're going to be excited to hear some of your questions. We've got about 10 minutes left. So if you start to pop any questions you have in the chat, then Ryan is going to pick a couple out that we can address. But while we're waiting for your questions to pop into the chat, Ross and Divya, would you be able to share perhaps just one more, practical, tangible way that you could recommend or that you've tried to help overcome feelings of imposter phenomenon?
Yeah, so for me, leaning into those core values is certainly what I've found to be my most valuable tool. And of those, I feel like curiosity is certainly there. So jumping on the balcony and then asking those key questions: where is this feeling coming from? How might it be different to how you've felt this previously? Who could you talk to about this? Because it's not something you need to go through alone, and we all have those trusted people around us to have these conversations with. Some of us may find ourselves, luckily, in a position where those people are immediately around us and part of our workplace. Other times they're in extended networks, and you need to look outside of your existing workplace. And I think that's something that needs to be done quite deliberately too. Divya?
Absolutely. That was going to be one of the key ones that I was going to share, Ross. And also touching on something you said earlier, evidence and feedback are such critical tools to help get out of that cycle. Being very mindful of the evidence you collect. And I spent a lifetime of collecting evidence of not being enough. And I think where it started to change is actively, exactly like you said, actively seeking people, actively seeking that feedback from people that you respect and trust, and know they mean what they say. So I sought out, I really it spent years listening and understanding positive feedback, because that was my challenge, really believing that acknowledgement and commendation, which helped me reframe the story I was telling myself. And it's not so much about external validation, but when you're caught in the tornado of believing negative things about yourself, it takes a lot of strong, positive voices around you to challenge and reframe. And when you do get that positive feedback, do believe it. And I think the one key thing I want to end by saying is gratitude journaling. It really changed my life. It helped me string together all the great things about my life and make that the hero story and replace the story of inadequateness I was telling myself.
And I love Suzanne's tip in the comments. Shout out to Suzanne, fellow 2023 alumni. Think about what you'd say or think if the things that happens to you happen to a friend. And I think that's a great words, right? Because often we aren't great at taking our own advice, but it's the first thing that we'd help others with.
That is so true. It's so true. And, pulling to on something you said, Ross, about, the networks, well, both of you around the networks of people. One of the great things, too, about being a Williamson alum is that we have the Williamson network. We are still using our WhatsApp chat from our 2022 group, and use each other for support. And, of course, not every single person is someone you chat to every day, but there are those people you really connect with, and others, even that you may not know so well, will still always take that call if you want some help, or some support. And I think, that actually even goes to one of the questions that was in the chat. I'm just taking a look to see if I can find it. It was around changing sectors in a shift of career entirely. As someone in the career space, I think that's a really relevant topic. And what skills can you inquire to gain the faith in your core worth? I think in an answer to that one, Eva, back to what Divya said, I think look at what is the evidence you have of the skills you have now that are transferable. There will be skills you already bring. And so even taking the time to write those down on a piece of paper, because what that can help you do is identify, is there an actual skill gap? So there's something I need to work on, and then you could be proactive there. Or is it just, I have transferable skills, but I'm feeling unworthy. So, one tip I would have is to try and pull that apart, and doing that in writing can be extremely helpful because, as Divya would know from the journaling, it lets you look at things in a different way. And in fact, our brains process information differently when we write things down, rather than when we just think about them. And I think from my side, one thing that I've used, or a tip I might have, was two. I can't help it. One is use your learner hat. So when you're in a new job, you have a period of time, everyone knows you're learning. Lean hard into that. Say, hey, I'm new, as I just, try and accelerate my pace on the learning curve, I'd love to ask for your help with this or your insights in that. Wearing the learner hat and leaning into it is a really, really useful thing to do. And, especially as Ross had said, in some of those career transitions. The other thing that I have really tried to do is say, what is the worst that could happen? Literally yesterday, going to the new parents group, my husband said to me, Lucy, what is the worst that can happen? Maybe those mums or parents don't think X, Y, or Z about you, but you know what? They're not even thinking about you. Like, it's fine. We'll put her in the car and we'll take the baby home if it gets too rough. So my, one tip I think would be, what is the worst that can happen? Try and remind yourself of that. I know we only have 5 minutes to go. So just taking a look at some of the questions that we have in the chat. What's amazing is to see that we've actually got lots of suggestions here as well. So I encourage everyone to look at the chat for some of the fantastic suggestions that people are passing on. In terms of just looking for a question, we have here, when we're in a cycle, it can often be, we can be reactive to make an immediate shift. So what is the tip to help bring self-awareness to help move to a more, open space where we can be more responsive? Ross or Divya, do you have a thought on that?
For me, I find myself in a spiral. This perhaps sometimes a negative self-talk spiral, and when I, occasionally so deep in it, something clicks, and I think this is perhaps something I've trained myself to do, and that moment is a reminder to get out of that zone. Observe yourself from the balcony. What's going on there? Why are you feeling like that? And even just that space between that intense feeling and deliberately separating yourself from that can be a really powerful gap. That just helps you make sense of it, and then return to that point without the same intensity of feeling, which gives you the impetus to actually do something about it, as we've been talking about. So I think creating that gap between that intense feeling and then what you're going to do next, really important trick.
Love that.
And I echo that. And I think from the time and mental gap, I would also recommend a physical gap, because I love being in that spiral and I find it very hard to get out of it. And I realize the fix to my mental spiral is not a mental thinking ritual. It's more that physical separation. And I I've built rituals around me where, whether it's a walk, in a park or whatever that might look like, or a talk with my mom or family, these kind of things take me out of that physical space. And then when I'm coming back to it, I won't get back to it without listing down. And I think someone asked in the chat, what is the difference between handwriting and typing? I love to write by hand, and I don't quote me on this, but I believe when you write something on a piece of paper, the physical act of doing it really helps your brain rewire. And please do read more about it, and don't take my word for it, but it helps me. It helps me when I write on a piece of paper, and big advocate for that.
I think
Can
you're
I
absolutely right, Divya.
just want to go to a couple of comments I've seen in the chat. Firstly, to Kate Kilgannon's comment. It sucks that you've experienced that, and really hope that in being able to share your story and talk to others, that kind of helps get through those moments. They shouldn't happen in the workplace, and that's looking at how men have impacted and added to that self-doubt, and imposter syndrome. And also to I'm loving the support that Ali Reyes is getting with sharing her experience as well, and thank you for sharing that, Ali. That's really I'm sad to hear that you're experiencing that right now. There is a way through, and you will find it. You've seen that support here now, and that's the sort of stuff that's around you, and will get you through.
Amazing. Well, we've got a minute to go, so we'll wrap up here. But I think just some key takeaways here are that anyone can experience imposter phenomenon. Doesn't matter who we are, at what stage of our careers or lives. We can see it shows up differently for people, and we've got some practical tips, around look at the evidence, looking at how you can lean on your support network. So there are some amazing tips there. Thank you all for being so present in this conversation. It was great fun. And Tara, I'll hand it to you to wrap up.
Yeah, thank you, Lucy. The only thing I really want to say is to thank you to Lucy, Ross, and Divya for your contribution today. Your stories, the way that you've been able to share has just been, I think, has been really warmly received by our participants today. So thank you so much. And thank you everyone who came along. There will be the usual comms, and anyone who missed out on the recording, we will send that to them as well. But again, I just want to say have a wonderful day, and please reach out if anyone has any questions. Thank you.
Thank you.